Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I came across a study that was just put out, and I wanted to cover it, and I saw it come through Dr. Mike's page, and it was a study looking at German volume training as far as strength and hypertrophy goes. And what I've done here, a lot of people are like, well, why are you putting it up here in the pictures? I'm putting it in the pictures because I've historically had a problem with YouTube over the last year, and I guess it's because of trolls and other people reporting it. It's against YouTube's rules to link non-social media websites in videos with the express purpose of making the video to direct traffic away from YouTube. And I've gotten in trouble for linking studies when I do videos about studies. So I've removed every single study from every video I've ever done. And people are just going to have to deal with it. I have to follow YouTube's rules, and they don't like me doing that for whatever reason. Now, I usually fight it and win, but I get penalties on my account for it, and it's just not worth it to me. So by me linking it up there, not the link, but you guys can see the study, we can discuss the material, and you guys should be able to find the study on your own using Google if you're so inclined to read the full thing yourself. Now, that being said, this study looked at German volume training, and I think it really kind of debunks this idea that bodybuilders have circulated to this sort of training is really ideal for hypertrophy, because they tried to say, oh, it's the best way. And we know that volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy. But what was interesting in this is that it took a modified GVT and then compared it with slightly lower volume. Now, they did the secondary exercises with the same volume and everything, and I'll go ahead and flip all that in right now. So what they did, they took a 3-day split, and they took a bunch of lifters who had a minimum of 1 year of training experience, a minimum of 1 year continuous training experience in which they had been to the gym and trained with weights at least 3 days for the last 3 months before the start of the study, so that they weren't untrained. And they put them on this program. And what they did, if you guys look at it, you can see all the sets and reps of doing this really lightweight stuff, which is what GVT is. It's 10 by 10. And you'll notice for day one, they took flat bench and lat pull down, and they had them do 10 sets of 10 in one group, and the other group did 5 sets of 10. So it's their high volume and their lower volume. And then behind it, they did 4 sets of 10 on incline, 4 sets of 10 on seated rows, and a bunch of crunches. Day 2 was a leg day. They took leg press and dumbbell lunges, did the exact same setup on the protocol, 5 sets versus 10, and then they have some accessory works with 4 sets of 10 after. Then session 3 is shoulder press, upright row, and then triceps, biceps, and again, more abs. Now, the thing that they did here, some people say, well, that's all high volume. It is all high volume, and that's kind of an interesting point. It's all high volume, and that's what people need to understand. When you look at this study, when you go look at the muscle gained, they decided the muscle gains were no statistically significant difference, but the lower volume group over the 12 weeks gained about 1 more kilo of lean body mass. Just throwing that out there, which was almost double, the amount of muscle. So you've got to keep that in mind. In other words, the lower volume group gained more muscle mass, just slightly. They're calling it statistically insignificant, if I'm reading it correctly, because they made similar gains. And they put them on just some basic progressive overload. Now, the other thing that was interesting here is that I'm going to call this out like I usually do. These are the worst programs I've just about ever seen. I would never, ever, ever put any person on a program like either one of these if their goal was to gain a bunch of muscle, because we already see what happened with the lower body. If you guys go pull up the study yourselves and look at it, because they actually did scans and they looked at arm gains, torso gains, leg gains. The lower volume group only gained 0.2 kilograms of muscle in their lower body, and the higher volume group averaged a slight muscle loss in their lower body. In other words, doing 30 sets for your legs or 28 sets for your legs in one day and then not training them again for a week, these guys lost muscle, supposedly. Now, I think they might have gained a little bit because their strength went up slightly, but the muscle gain was different. Definitely the slightly lower volume, which is still a hell of a lot of volume, right? It's 14 sets for everything. And that's what we need to keep in mind. Now, the upper body groups, they both gained muscle in the upper body, but the lower volume gained slightly more. Now, people say, I thought you said volume was the primary driver of hypertrophy. It is. You have a minimum effective volume and a maximum effective volume. And when you exceed your maximum effective volume, you progress slower on your lifts. If you progress slower on your lifts, your overload increases slower. This kind of shows you guys that you can it definitely exceeds your recoverable volume, because that's what we saw. The lower volume group, still, if you look at their chest and back day, they have 14 sets for their chest for pressing, and they have 14 sets of pulling. And you compare that, well, it's not even 14, I'm sorry, it's 9 sets versus 14, because they have 5 and 4 and 10 and 4. Then they have a separate pressing day, and there's pulling in there also. Those shoulder presses and upright rows re-hit those muscles. The triceps and biceps get worked again. Those same muscles get worked. But the shoulder pressing works your chest, it works your upper back. Upright rows work your upper back, shoulder. So shoulders, upper chest, back, all that got hit twice in the week. Well, 9 sets, pretty much what happened there, because the same thing, the shoulder press, if you go look on the other day, the triceps and biceps are getting 14 sets on those days, both days. The delts are getting an enormous amount of training between those several lifts. So the thing that you're going to note there, you're talking about doing at least 9 total work sets per body part twice a week for the upper body, right? 9 total work sets. Because when you look at the fact of all the compounds done, again, the volume is very, very high here. So here's the point. The extra 10 sets on those 2 days didn't produce any more muscle growth. In other words, the extra 20 sets a week of upper body work on the GVT group didn't produce any additional muscle mass, and it produced slightly less strength. Now that's the take home there, because I'm going to show you guys next. I'm going to flip that in. Now granted, the lower set group, their people averaged slightly less weight. They were slightly weaker at the start. Now that could explain why they gained slightly more muscle, which could explain the difference there. Their upper bodies were slightly weaker on the bench press. They finished stronger. All right, so they gained more muscle and more strength. They started at a weaker place, but they surpassed the other group in terms of strength by the end. So again, here's our big caveat. Why did they gain slightly more muscle, even though statistically insignificant amount? Because they got stronger. Because they were probably able to increase their weight faster, even with the higher volume, because the volume was recoverable. By keeping the volume recoverable, they gained more strength. It allowed them to gain slightly more muscle. All that extra volume didn't pay off, and that's what people need to understand. When we say you need a minimum effective volume to stimulate growth and that you have a maximum recoverable volume, that means that at a certain threshold, adding mindless volume stops producing anything for you and can actually slow your results in some cases. Not every time, but in some cases. Don't throw mindless volume at it. Now, the other thing I want to talk about that really bothers me with this, like I always say, look how weak these guys finished. All right, the average for the strongest group was a 90 kilo bench press. Now, if you read it, they weren't even required to touch the chest. They were just required to get close to the chest. So you're telling me not meet legal, not required to pause, not even required to touch their chest, that the average out of the better group was a 90 kilo bench? That's a 198 pound max bench. These are healthy young men who have been training for at least a full year, who were put on a structured 12-week program with progressive overload, who all gained a little bit of body weight. They all got bigger. They all gained muscle. And the best bench, their average bench was 200 pounds in the best group. It's like I usually say, why are we studying garbage programs? Why don't we ever have researchers actually have good programs written by strength and conditioning coaches? Because when you look at this program, it's total garbage. Both programs are. 3-day split with legs only once a week, so no wonder they didn't gain leg strength or size. Ultra high volume garbage lower body lifts. There's no squatting. There's no deadlifting. No variations of them. Why would anyone ever do anything else for their lower body other than to address a weakness? This is not an effective lower body program. This lower body program will only work for people blasting a bunch of drugs. It clearly didn't work on people who've already trained over a year. They didn't gain any significant muscle in their lower bodies. They gained barely any strength. Their strength is still pretty bad at the end. It didn't work that well. It just didn't work. And the same thing, the upper body, I mean, at least there's a bunch of free weight pressing. But Shoulder press. What do they mean by a shoulder press? Is that a machine? I don't know. At least they have them flat bench, and at least they have them incline bench, but lat pull down, seated rows, all this isolation work, it's a bunch of fluff and pump. And the way it's spread out using ultra lightweight, the heaviest weight is 70%, and that's on the secondary lifts. Again, this sort of training, high volume, lightweight training like this for really high reps, and yes, I consider 10 to be high reps, shouldn't be run for more than 3 weeks. Like, I would never have anyone run that sort of low intensity, ultra high volume for more than a 3-week block. It's absurd to do so, and anyone who coaches people knows that. Unless you're running it as concurrent style training and you're rotating heavier work in the same week, this sort of training is garbage unless you're blasting a bunch of drugs. This training like this is the reason so many young men stall completely in their games and go on drugs sooner than they should. Not saying they ever should, but the fact is they do choose to do so a lot sooner than you would expect people to. It's because of garbage ass bodybuilding programs like this that don't produce results. And for some reason, the strength and conditioning world knows this. Real coaches know this, but people who have exercise science degrees seem to not understand any of this. This training is garbage. These results were garbage in both groups. These guys finished small and weak. Why don't they ever study well-written, proven programs? They never, ever do it. And I think it's because it'll destroy all the research that's already out there. If they ran a bunch of people on starting strength, or my program, my novice program, either one of my novice programs, or strong lifts, or anything like that, it would make all their other research they've ever done look like trash. It would make the industry, it would make the whole exercise science community look bad. That's what I think. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.